Chapter 10. Xana's Rebirth. The director's office was a small room that stank of dust and was taken over by a large, dark wooden desk and a metal filing cabinet. Mago's men had placed two powerful computers on the table, capable of connecting to the command post and accessing the code on Richard's palm computer. Jeremy looked all around him. On the other side of the door were two soldiers standing guard, but he and Memory were alone in the room. After all, she was Mago's assistant, which surely gave her a certain amount of independence. Without making himself noticed, the young boy inspected the content of the first drawer of the desk. He found a stapler and a pen from which he removed the plastic cap and, while Memory had her back to him, used to remove the screws as quickly as possible from the metal tower of the computer. As soon as he finished the operation, a wide smile appeared on his face. Mago's technicians had been ordered to prevent Jeremy from connecting to the internet, but instead of removing the wireless card, they simply disconnected the cables. The boy put the wires back in place in several seconds and closed the central processing unit once more. He could succeed. If the factory had a Wi-Fi connection to the internet, he could now localize it, hack the passcode, and finally entered in contact with Caddick. Jeremy was about to get to work with the keyboard when Memory interrupted him with a hand gesture. The woman took a small artifact out from her pocket that resembled a tennis ball. She held it with two fingers, and from the center of the ball appeared a red antenna. "Mago surely set up microphones in this room, but my little machine will interfere with them long enough for us to talk in peace," she said. Faced with a perplexed Jeremy, she continued to speak. "Last night you called me by a new name, Anthea." "It's not a new name," the boy murmured. "It's your real name." "I know, and you also know my husband, and my daughter." Your daughter is named Aelita," said Jeremy, looking her intensely in the eyes, "and your husband is Baldo Schaefer. In other words, Professor Hopper." Memory brought her hands to her mouth. "Hopper? The same Hopper who invented the supercomputer?" Jeremy saw the woman's eyes fill with tears. He smiled, approached her, and began to tell her everything. Lyoko was a fake world. The air hadn't the faintest of scents, and there wasn't even the slightest of a breeze. The snow didn't crunch under the sole of Alita's elbow shoes, and ice was everywhere, even though it wasn't cold. The sky was a uniform navy blue. Alita knew that for the rest of the kids, this strange world was difficult to bear. It made them nauseous and gave them vertigo, and they had trouble adapting to its ambience. But it was different for her. In a sense, she was like Xana, a creature of Lyoko. The tower was glowing in front of them. It was about 10 meters high, and its surface was opaque and smooth like alabaster. Alita ran as fast as she could with Xana by her side. "Can we do it?" she asked without slowing down. "Will we really be able to open a breach from this Lyoko to the real one from the present?" Xana burst out laughing. "You'll see," he said to her. "Together we're capable of anything." They quickly crossed the final stretch and stopped one step from the tower. Gnarled roots like tentacles sprung from the ground, twisting and winding around the base of the structure that glowed of its own light. Aelita extended a hand and saw her fingers disappear through the curved wall, creating small ripples on its surface. She crossed to the entrance of the tower like a ghost. She found herself in a dark space illuminated only by the fluorescent symbol that wasn't on the ground, formed by circles and lines that represented the eye of Xana. From outside, the tower seemed as high as a 5-story building, but its inside seemed infinite. Even upon sharpening her view as much as she could, Aelita wasn't able to make out a ceiling. The young girl knew that in reality there was no ceiling. She looked at Xana, took him by the hand, and walked with him to the center of the eye on the floor. A strong wind pushed them up, ruffling their clothes and flying the children up at a breakneck speed. They suddenly stopped on a small circular platform that was floating in midair. At more or less 1.5 meters above the platform, suspended in the air, was a bright screen. "Be brave," whispered Xana. Aelita nodded. With the box from the mirror held strongly in one hand, she pressed her other hand on the screen, and suddenly letters appeared on the monitor forming the word Aelita. The walls of the tower became covered with symbols, strange white glyphs that began to glide downward in a cascade of light. Xana posed his hands beside the young girl's, completely covering the screen. He closed his eyes and exclaimed, "Start the procedure." Memory attentively listened to absolutely all of Jeremy's words, then stood and left the room. The boy had let her leave. It must be hard on her. Anthea had been kept prisoner by Hannibal Mako for 20 years, a whole life. And now she had to learn from the mouth of an unknown boy that her husband was dead and that her daughter was still alive, but was 13 years old instead of 23. Jeremy sighed. He had avoided telling Anthea certain details. For example, that Aelita was currently on Lyoko with the rest of the kids. He understood how the woman felt, and knowing that her daughter was so close to her might make her feel better. But the young boy had a lot of work to do and needed as much help as possible from both her and Aelita. He let his fingers fly across the keyboard. He tried a direct attack, using brute force, against the passcode of the factory network, then another. A bit later, he managed to strike down all the protection barriers and immediately conceal his invasion by erasing the registries and some other small tricks. Lastly, he took advantage of the internet connection to analyze the state of the transmissions entering and leaving Caddick. The science lab had clearly become the center of intelligence, harboring an intense amount of communication. At the moment, through Professor Hertz's computer, about a dozen international telephone conversations were passing. The one making all these calls couldn't be Professor Hertz. Jeremy had only just seen her a while ago in the factory taken captive, so then who was it? The boy focused in on the active computer and opened a chat window. "I am Jeremy, at the factory on the island," he wrote. "Who am I talking to?" After several moments, a response arrived. "Dito, is the connection secure?" Jeremy couldn't believe his luck. The boss of the Men in Black had come to France and was at Caddick. "I don't know," he typed. "Okay, it is now. I've activated some devices. Are you able to talk?" Jeremy explained the situation to the woman and read her summary of all the latest events, mouth open. The Men in Black were ready to attack the factory and were trying everything they could to get them all out before having to resort to more extreme measures to stop Mago. Dito didn't tell him the type of attack that she had in mind, but Jeremy was smart enough to figure it out on his own. National security was at risk, and the agents would act in response using whichever means necessary at their disposal. What was at risk was too important for them to leave the situation unresolved. The young boy stopped to think, biting his lips. There must be another solution. There must be. "We aren't done yet," he wrote in conclusion. "I'll try to get back in touch with you later." And he closed the window. The screen in front of Aelita had grown. It was now more or less her height and as wide as a door. It resembled a mirror that would be placed on the inside of a closet door, except that the young girl was unable to see her reflection in front of her. Instead, she could see a bunch of trees. It was the forest sector of Lyoko. Ulrich and Eva were sitting on the ground, talking. "Aelita!" cried Ulrich upon noticing the presence of his friend. The young man hopped to his feet. "Wait!" Xana kept him back as he began to approach the screen. "I still need to stabilize the connection." Beside Ulrich appeared another Xana. He was exactly identical to the one with Aelita in the tower, and he had the same focused expression on his face. The two Xanas observed each other for a moment from the two sides of the opening. Then the one located with Ulrich brought up his hands to support the lower corners of the screen. It seemed to take a great effort on his part, as if the breach was trying to close itself by exerting an incredible amount of pressure. "What's happening?" asked Aelita with a reedy voice. The Xana by her side gave a tired smile. "The other part of me is helping me to open the connection now with the real Lyoko. This way we'll be able to take care of Yumi and Odd." The young man raised his hands towards the sky and used them to summon a new screen. Lita placed her two hands against it to introduce her activation code, and an image formed immediately inside. It was of Odd, who had been waiting impatiently on the third underground floor of the factory. Alita outstretched a hand towards her friend, and her hands sunk into the smooth surface of the screen, crossing through. "Quick!" she called out to him. "Come through here!" Odd gave an expression of pure and simple stupor. He quickly obeyed, crossing through the screen in a jump, suddenly finding himself between Aelita and Xana in the tower. The young man with black hair closed the portal with a sigh and made another one appear, this time showing Yumi at the command post of the factory. They had nearly succeeded. The young girl passed through the portal and joined back up with Odd and Aelita inside the tower. Xana closed the breach and approached his copy, who was maintaining the opening to Lyoko. The two Xanas stood face to face, legs apart, anchored firmly to the ground, their arms stretched up against the top of the opening. Their faces were tense from all the effort. Lita could see their muscles shaking under the pressure, which must have been immense. Yumi jumped through the portal to reach Ulrich and Eva. The young girl, clothed as a geisha, rushed to embrace the samurai with such love that the two ended up tumbling onto the grass of the forest sector intertwined. Odd smiled at Eva before leaping with joy in her direction. "Alita," exhaled the two Xanas at the same time, their teeth clenched. "Go, now. I can't hold the breach open for much longer." The young girl hesitated. "What about you?" she asked. "I'll do what I have to do," replied the two Xanas. "But—" "Hurry! That's an order!" His tone was so forceful and weak that Alita obeyed instantly. Odd and Ulrich took her by the arms, and the young girl crossed through the screen. She abandoned the mirror and found herself in Lyoko, close to her friends. The portal immediately shut behind her with the ferocious snap of a guillotine. The whirlwind from the implosion tossed Xana's particles with it, or rather the ones of the Xana who had been stuck within the mirror. The artificial intelligence's passage wasn't physical. A blast of bits of information crossed the software of the portal and entered Lyoko, where the unification procedure that had been waiting them immediately executed. The experiences and thoughts that had occupied the body of the first Xana were divided up, analyzed, and assimilated into the larger Xana awaiting it. It was like a stream that, after having finally crossed the mountains, met up with the plains where it can merge with the main river. But it was also something different, something more, like a large explosion. Xana felt the power surging through him, making him tremble with excitement. He was alive. He was a mathematical machine, and the principles of mathematics confirmed that the whole was equal to the sum of its parts. But upon reunifying himself, he became something greater than his individual pieces. He was now a person, and this person needed to find his outlet through something physical, through a body. Xana laughed, and his laughter shook the eternally still trees of the Yoko and ruffled the hair of the children who were watching him from the center of the clearing. He was about to reunite with them, become one of them. He knew that by accepting his new human dimension, he would lose a lot of his powers. He could no longer abandon his body, for example, to enter another's and control them. But that didn't matter to him. To be a person was what was really important to him. To become human. This was his choice, his destiny, and he was ready to accept it with all of its consequences. Xana gave his body form. He let the Yoko construct the identity of its guardian for the last time. He transformed himself into a tall, thin, young boy, dressed in a tight-fitting outfit. His hair was completely disheveled, except that it was no longer black, but the color of wheat left to ripen in the sun. Alita approached him and extended a hand towards him. "Is it you?" she asked. "You're Xana." The young boy nodded his head and gave a slight bow. "I did what I had to do. Thanks to you, Alita, I'm now a new person. The guardian of the Yoko is from now on a child, just like you."